Hello, Vanessa.
Hello,
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Vanessa Kisuule. I'm a writer and a performer, and
Nice.
that's it.
So Vanessa, you've been lots of kinds of writing, and you've been lots of different things. You're a multiple slam champion. You're a published poet. You were the former Bristol City Poet.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. My first question is, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the differences and the similarities in those kind of things. So do you approach your writing with an output in mind? Do you start writing thinking this is going to be something I'll say out loud, or this is something I'm going to write down that's going to be on a page?
I always write with performance in mind. I think we forget that, the printing press and the subsequent publishing of words is a fairly new phenomenon as far as our relationship to words and to storytelling. Before we ever had anything on a piece of paper, we were learning great big masses of words and text and reciting them, around fires or, in the courts or whatever it might be. And, the oral tradition of poetry for me is the most ancient and the most profound one. And I think the relationship we have to poetry in books is just a vehicle for that to still come alive. I think a poem is only ever really at its best when it's being said aloud. And it doesn't necessarily have to be read with any bells or whistles, but I think many times when I'm reading for my own pleasure, poems only really start to resonate when I say them aloud to myself. So I'm always muttering poems to myself in my house when I'm reading collections. So when I write, that's always at the forefront. How is this sounding? And when I'm typing away on my laptop, I always try and say the lines to myself. And that is the best way to edit, I think, as well. Something that isn't obviously clanging as a line when you write it, when you read it out loud, it becomes immediately obvious that, that bit is a little bit gritty, or that enjambment doesn't quite work. And yeah, the voice is a really powerful tool, I think, in discerning whether a poem is doing the job that you want it to.
Amazing. There's a little moment in there as well. You talked about reading for pleasure, and I think that a lot of writing is writing for pleasure. But then in your role as the Bristol City Poet, there must have been that was a bit more focused around sort of creating things that react to things that are going on. So it's kind of a bit more like commission. Do you think that there's sort of a different approach to writing for commission as there is to writing for pleasure?
I think every writer is going to have a different attitude to writing to commission, writing to brief. For me personally, I'm quite happy to balance the sometimes contrasting needs of myself as a writer and what I want to express and how I want to express it, and understanding that there is a company or an organization or an audience on the other side that also have a need. And I think you have to sit with yourself before you accept a commission or a brief and really think about whether you're willing to balance those needs, because sometimes they align, but sometimes they're quite different. And in my case, I would say that a lot of the times things that I write for commission aren't necessarily things that I would write myself. They don't necessarily have the same register or the same creative experimentation that I lean more towards at this point in my career, because I'm aware that it might be a poem that is going to be consumed by people who aren't necessarily poetry lovers. And that's not to be condescending, but oftentimes accessibility is a really important part of writing something for a brief, especially in the city poet role. And for some artists, that's too big a compromise to make. But I actually really love the challenge of trying to bridge the gap between, being a really nerdy poet that's really into form and, abstract, surreal stuff, and also trying to get people who don't like poetry or don't even have an opinion on poetry to be able to engage, to feel like there's something in it that might excite them. So it's a tightrope that's hard to stay on, but I think it's a valuable pursuit, and I hardly ever like commissioned work that I've written for itself. Like, I would never say, oh, this is my best work, but I'm always proud of writing something that I feel has done what it was intended to do. So I suppose those are two different criteria.
Yeah. There's something interesting in there that you were saying about that you're at a point in your career where you're really focusing on experimentation. I know today you've talked a lot about sort of embracing failure. Is that something that you try and do in your practice?
Absolutely. I think you go crazy otherwise. I think you become crippled by this obsession with perfectionism. And I think we live in a culture that really fetishizes, people love to be self-declared perfectionists. And I often wonder what on earth that means. I mean, obviously having pride in what you do is, a very understandable and covetable baseline, for any artist. But what is perfection? Is it even that interesting? Is it something that's worth pursuing? I understand what perfectionism is about. I think it's a deep desire to make something that doesn't allow anyone access to us in a critical capacity. It's like, you can't say anything to me because I have made something that's literally perfect. No one can come and tell me anything. I've made this perfect thing. Which, when you're really sort of analytical about it, is about ego. I don't think it's about the art. I don't think it's about the conversation that you're trying to have with people that consume your art. I think it's about ego. So I don't know. I'm less and less enamored with this notion of perfectionism, if there even is such a thing. So yeah, I think failure is a wonderful thing, and a lot of the artists that I admire seem to really, really lean into it. And it's those little quirks and slight imperfections in their work that make it interesting and make it theirs. So yeah, I think embracing failure is a really wonderful and radical approach to being an artist, particularly in a world that is so results focused, and everything is so immediate and generic, and I think it can be a really exciting thing to just say, you know what, I'm not here to produce this perfect packaged thing that you expect. I'm here to throw spaghetti at the wall. I say that phrase a lot. I don't know where I got it from, but it's the perfect metaphor for what I think our job is as artists. It's just to have a go.
The other thing that sort of ties in with all of that is this that we've talked about again today, this idea of constraint as a motivation for creativity. Do you want to give us a little bit of, say something about that?
Yeah, I think I don't know whether you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, but there's always a task where they have to make a dress for the runway at the end out of random scrappy materials. It might be stuff from a skip, it might be depending on the theme they're working with. Essentially, they can't just pluck a beautiful dress that some seamstress made for them months ago that they've already brought to wear on the show. And that, to me, is always the true measure of your ingenuity, because it's not actually about who the best seamstress in the room is. It's not about the person who has, studied dress design and can cut out a perfect pattern. It's just about your ability to look at a random pile of junk and see the potential. And the moment your brain starts fizzing and you think, oh, I can put that with that, and maybe that won't work, or maybe that's not going to be a cohesive thing. So what happens if I do this? And you get your glue gun out and you get some glitter, and you really get into that zone that you do as a child, where unless you were very rich and privileged, you didn't have every toy that you could possibly want, but you learned how to hold this pepper shaker and pretend that this was an action man, and you did this and you did that, and like that level of creativity. And how that, again, is far more interesting than having the perfect, polished, shiny thing. So I think Constraint is a really beautiful way to see the true capacity of your own creativity and your problem solving. And I think that's a really great way to think about creativity, is problem solving. The problem being, I want to write a poem that explores this idea, or that starts in this place, and how am I going to not solve, because that implies that there's like a correct way to go about it, but this idea of like, I'm trying to navigate this situation. I'm trying to move from one point to another point. And sometimes knowing that there is a path, or knowing that there is a particular set of ways you can go about it, is so much easier than just being told you can go anywhere, you can do anything. That sometimes can actually feel like the least exciting thing ever. So yeah, I think Constraint, ironically, is one of the most freeing things we can have as artists.
Beautiful. Slight sidebar. What's your drag name?
Ooh, I'm so bad at coming up with stuff like that.
Mine's Areola Grande.
I'm not beating that. I'm not even going to attempt. Clap, clap, clap. Did you come up with that yourself?
Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. Really pleased with it.
You should be. You should be. I'm going to have to holler at you later, because I need to at least match or surpass that. So I'll get back to you guys later with that one.
The final thing that would be great today was, do you have a writing prompt or something you could offer to anyone that's watching this who wanted to be motivated to write right now?
Yes, I do have a writing prompt. So this one's quite tricky, but it's really fun if you're excited by this idea of constraint. You want to think about two different scenarios. One is quite banal. It might be something like washing the dishes or getting your groceries, something of that nature. And then the other one is something really heavy. It might be trying to say to someone that you love them for the first time. It might be trying to pull someone from the lip of a cliff, something, with a lot of emotional stakes, right? And you want to write a piece that is both of these scenarios at the same time. So you could read it one way and it's just someone buying their groceries or someone doing the dishes, or you could read it another way and be like, this is someone being pulled off the lip of a cliff, or this is someone trying to tell someone they love them for the first time. So for example, let's say that I am trying to talk to someone about a really rough time they're having, but also we're putting up a tent, right? And one line that does both of those things would be, just hold it together. That could be a line in the poem. So I'm asking them to maybe just hold up some tent pegs or something in one version of the poem, but also the same poem could also be me telling a person to hold it together, i.e., it's okay, I got you, I know that you feel like you're falling apart, but just hold it together, right? So what that exercise is hopefully going to do for you is make you realize how much can be said with one line, all of the different implications that can come from the same piece of writing. So that's quite a tricky thing, but I reckon if you're up for Constraint, that's a really nice exercise to try.
Beautiful. Vanessa, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.